And here we go. Here we go. Wonderful. Good morning and hello, and please take your seat in our virtual Space Café today. We are recording this webinar session and we will make it available on SpaceWatch.Global after this session. We are also streaming the Space Café today on YouTube, on LinkedIn and Facebook and X. If everything goes according to plan so far, I think it looks great. So hello to everyone who joins us from there. And if you have a question, please use the chat section here on StreamYard, Facebook and YouTube. That should be connected. LinkedIn does not get us your questions back. So I encourage you to send us your question and be engaged with us for this session, because we do that for you out in the world. One last point before we start, please keep your messages in the chat in a professional and respectful tone. Otherwise, we have to take actions. So, one. And here we are. So, hello, everyone. It's Torsten Kriening, space publisher of SpaceWatch.Global. First, please allow me to thank all of our Business Club members for their support. This is what always keeps us, our independent journalism alive. And we really appreciate your help. So we are grateful for that. If you want to know more about our Business Club and how to join, you will see that in a banner that I put up in a bit. So remember also to sign up to our newsletters. We have a daily one, an exclusive weekly one, and a space communication one. And we try to post the links for the sign up here later on. And don't forget to listen to our collection of podcasts. We have hundreds of them by now, and you have plenty of choices. Our Space Café podcast channel is one of them. Our Space Café radio channel is one of them. The latest one there just published this morning with Pacom Rebellion from Nova Space about the outcomes of the recent World Space Business Week in Paris. And we have also a new initiative run by our editor-in-chief, Dr. Amagati. It's called Space for Good podcast, so focused on space for climate, environment, and the global community. And that will be also available later here in the chat. And last one is that we have, of course, a fan shop where you can help us to grow and to sustain. So, done with the ads now, and we can finally start. With that, I'm handing over to your host today, live in Sydney, Professor Steven Freeland. Steven, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Torsten. Hi, how are you? And hi, everybody, on this beautiful afternoon here in Sydney. It's gorgeous weather. I hope wherever you are, you're all well. The world is struggling at the moment, but at least for the next hour and a bit, we will talk all things space. And it's been a very interesting period in space. We've recently, as you know, had the General Assembly agree the Pact for the Future and space and the peaceful uses of space and the benefits arising from space and the centrality of outer space law are all at the forefront in the Pact for the Future. So that's a good sign, at least. So welcome. This is, Torsten, our 18th, isn't it? Our 18th Space Cafe breakfast. It's an institution now, and it's just a pleasure to be here. I've got amazing people.
In Germany, we can vote now.
Yeah, but who do you vote for? That's the issue. We've got two of the nicest people, but also two of the best commercial lawyers that in the world as our guests today, Rada and François. I'll introduce them formally in a minute, but amongst a whole range of other things, today is a really interesting and important day where Rada is. So she has invited us to have this breakfast in a very special place. So Rada, good morning to you. And tell us where we are and why we're here.
Thank you so much, Steven. Good evening to you down there in Australia. So today we have two very special occasions. First of all, the 3rd of October, it's the National Day of Germany, because it marks the day of the German reunification from 1990. At the same time, in Bavaria, a very important part of Germany, it is still Oktoberfest time. This is why today we have met in a very nice Bavarian beer tent at the Oktoberfest. So welcome, everyone.
Oh, that's great. And Rada, after work today, where will you be going? Will you be going and joining one of these festivities or going home?
If you are in Munich during the Oktoberfest, you're bound to go to the Oktoberfest, especially as it ends just in a couple of days.
Oh, well, that's great. Thank you for inviting us here. I've never been to an Oktoberfest. There's probably a reason for that. So I'm glad to be here now. So with that welcome, we are going to look at a whole range of issues relating to launch, why the global demand for launch services is seemingly insatiable. And, I'll be putting it to both Rada and François, who are experts in this field, as to whether there should be some caps or how things could be improved or whatever. We'll be looking at how do you operate a launch service provider across multiple jurisdictions? How do you operate a spaceport? If you're interested in any aspect to do with launch, then this is really, we've got two of the most incredible people. So let me formally introduce them to you. Firstly, we've got Rada, my dear friend, Dr. Rada Popova. She's a director of the legal and regulatory at the German launch services provider, Isar Aerospace. She manages the legal and regulatory aspects of the business and the corporate and contractual transactions. She studied, which is when I first met her, I think, at the University of Vienna, and then did a PhD with our dear friend, Dr. Stefan Horber at University of Cologne, and also graduated from the Center of Excellence for the Hague Academy. She worked as a senior research fellow at the University of Cologne, and then has become a practitioner. She's got expertise. She's contributed to many, many projects related to the regulation of space and aerospace activities with the European Space Agency, the German Aerospace Center, and private industry. She's also a member of and a rapporteur of the Space Law Committee of the International Law Association. We've just finished some really excellent work under Professor Horber and Rada's stewardship on suborbital flights. And she is a remarkably gifted scholar, has written many, many papers, and it's always a pleasure to work with her. So Rada, welcome. And then another dear friend who's living not far away from where I am, so it's evening for him as well. My dear, dear friend, François Lambert. François, welcome. François, and it's just been formally announced today in LinkedIn, good timing, is the General Manager of Regulatory and Corporate Affairs at Equatorial Launch Australia, which is a multi-user, multi-orbit spaceport in Northern Australia. François has 20 years of experience as a regulatory and a transactional lawyer in space, in defense, in telecommunications. He's been involved in major space infrastructural projects, Amazon's Project Kuiper, Galileo, Copernicus. He's a World Economic Forum expert on space. He's an advisor to a range of space startups working on really ambitious projects. And he really has a wealth of experience about shaping the future of space regulation and commercialization. And like myself, he's got particular interests in solving Earth and space sustainability challenges. So you can see we've got two great people. welcome to you, François. All right, so as you know, you've got to come here and tell us what you think about space. And a tradition that we have, we've had it from the very beginning, is that each of our esteemed guests will describe in one word what the wonders of space and space law are. One word. Torsten's put on the screen there the contributions of all of the other previous guests we've had. The rule is that new guests can never copy a word that's used before. So we've got this broader, eclectic mix of words. So François, welcome to you. It's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Tell me your word for the wonders of space.
Well, first of all, thank you, Steven and Torsten, for having us today. I have to thank you because I'm super stoked to chat with you and Rada on all things space launch related today in an Oktoberfest brekkie. So I don't know if that will influence the word I chose, but the word is transformative, and it's because space has changed how we live, from the way we communicate with each other to how we navigate. It's had a huge impact. Space law as well, of course, and it's a driver for new technologies. It's opening up industries and possibilities we never thought would be possible, and it's also transformative because and you know that better than anybody else, Steven. It's bringing nations together. It encourages collaboration all the while, and this is the space law part, keeping a focus on sustainable and responsible space activities. So transformative.
Well, and such a positive message, and it's transformed all of our lives as well. I mean, who would have thought? You've got at least on screen 3 people engaged in space law and governance, and then we've got Torsten, who just brings the whole world of space together, and so it's transformed all of us. That's a really positive message. Thanks, François. So, Rada, what's your one word for space?
Thank you, Steven, and Torsten also for keeping this tradition going. I think it's a wonderful idea to try to describe what we think and feel about space in just one word. My word is consciousness. To me, it does underline that we all, as humankind, just need to never forget that we must be conscious about outer space as the very environment we all exist in. We all know about the pale blue dot. We all know how small and how fragile the Earth is in the vastness of space. But exactly this is why we should be so conscientious also about the way that we treat outer space as an environment. Also, we should be conscious about the fact that without, again, I'm using the words on purpose, the conscientious use of outer space, we as humanity are doomed. Because as you all probably know, there is no modern life and no real progress without the use of space and space applications. So let's be cosmically conscious.
That's great. Again, another positive message but also a sobering one. You're absolutely right. So both of our words today, Torsten, look at issues around sustainability, about positive aspects of space. It's great because sometimes we get words that delve in other areas. So it's a positive start to the discussion. So let's really dig into it now, because as I said, we're really going to be talking a lot about launch and everything around launch. Everybody knows that, particularly, let us say, in the last 20, 25 years, the demand for launch services, particularly as the commercial sector has grown in space, the demand has been seemingly insatiable. It's grown exponentially. We see every year on year, there's a growth in the number of launches, and obviously now with small sats, an exponential rise in the number of satellites that are put into orbit by those launches. And yet, notwithstanding the fact that this is happening and being satisfied, every year we see more and more companies emerging that are looking to contribute to this launch ecosystem for governments, for corporates, for civil society. So we have more and more space launch companies. So, Rada, you're an expert in this area. You're an expert in many areas to do with the way the space industry ecosystem operates. You, I know, are passionate about trying to find ways for continuing this tendency towards more affordable access to space, equitable access to space for everybody. You work for a company that's a launch service provider in Europe. It's expanding its horizons. Where do you see the current state of the launch market? And, you know, if you had a crystal ball, where do you think it'll be in, say, 5 to 10 years? Is this growth just going to continue?
Of course, it's a very interesting question and a very complex one, especially if we look into the launch industry as a global industry. Obviously, launch services are part of the overall space industry that we see is continuously growing and expected to grow more and more over time. We know that the constantly increasing demand for satellite services and satellite data pushes towards more and more space launch missions. And with that, we come to the very bottleneck that at the moment I think we are facing on a global level, namely the bottleneck that is having sustainable, reliable, but also affordable access to space. There are a few very big players, possibly one that's the biggest in the world right now. But if you look at the geographic distribution, we are still far away from having a balanced and competitive enough launch services market. So I think that launch services will need to continue to grow, will need to become more competitive, more affordable, and more equitably distributed in a geographic sense. And Steven, because you want me to take my crystal ball in my hand, if I would need to share some projections for the next, let's say, half to or 5 to 10 years, I think we will see a continuing shift towards more commercial launches coming from purely private launch services providers that are trying to offer more affordable, more cost-effective solutions, not only in the US, but also everywhere else in the world, in Europe, in Asia, Australia. We have François here. At the same time, the challenge will be, of course, not only to develop the technological solutions, but also to reduce the costs in the end for the satellite providers, and to be able not just to enter the market, but also to stay on the market competing with the already existing global leaders. Of course, numerous challenges have to do with developing high cadence launch options. Now that we all see the need for satellite services requires that more and more spacecraft are launched on a more and more regular basis. So this refueling of orbits, of course, requires a high number of launches. We also need launches for rapid response, defense missions, and in particular, when we come back to sustainability, we will need more and more launch missions to ensure on-orbit servicing. There are many other aspects to that I think we will come to speak about today, but I think the biggest challenge right now is to ensure that we don't have a concentration of launch services only in one part of the world, but that satellite operators on a global scale have the maximum flexibility and a good, reliable choice, and are able basically to access space.
Okay, so you're positive, and you didn't even there talk about human spaceflight, you know, and launches and all that might entail. So that's obviously not an area that at the moment either you or François are involved, but you're very positive. François, Rada mentioned Australia. You know, I'm showing my age now, but I remember when we've had national space law, as you know, in Australia since 1998, so over 25 years. And I remember at the time when our 1998 legislation was put forward, the relevant minister said by 2010, Australia is going to have 10% of the global launch market. At the moment, Australia has 0% of the global commercial market. But of course, there are companies like ELA that are going to change that. I'm just interested, Francois, what's changed? We had the ministers, the government had such grand plans at the end of the last century, which haven't come to fruition about launch in a country like Australia. And now these companies like yourselves are emerging and very positive about it. What do you think's changed down here?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. First of all, clearly what we can say, I guess, Steven, is that the Australian regulatory framework has certainly come a long way, and not just the regulatory framework, because that's what you're talking about, but the industry itself. It came a long way since 1998. I mean, 1998. For many, it's ages ago. For you, it's yesterday, maybe. But let's say that okay, back then, and it's an interesting period. We're gonna go back to that period at some point, but in the discussion. But back then, clearly, especially from an Australian point of view, I guess the market was probably not mature enough, and like in other places, expectations were likely ahead of reality. But yeah, there's a shift today. The demand, and talking about launch services and staying in that realm, the demand for launch services, it's a truly global demand market. It's driven by needs from Asia, Europe, and the US, of course, not from Australia itself, which still is a pretty small market in terms of space, if there's a market at all. And people are going to be mad at me for saying that. But I think what makes Australia stand out is that it's an obvious choice, I guess, for launching to space. It's not just about the geography, though that's a big plus. But also it's it's about being a friendly, stable country, first of all. And there's been a shift. I mean, the regulatory environment has evolved profoundly, and it's a country where the regulatory piece makes it probably far easier to deal with than many other places. And you should know, because you've been involved in that. But let's say that it's not just that aspect. I would say there's been measures that have been taken, other type of measures. Obviously, the revamp of the Australian Space Act in 2018. But also, if you're in this part of the world, you know that we've signed, Australia and the United States have signed a bunch of agreements. There's obviously the AUKUS framework, which is more of a defense partnership, but there's also another one that's plugged into it. That's the Technology Safeguard Agreement. And without getting into the details of what it is really, but it's basically a framework that will make launches, or at least the movement, the transfer of US space technology, quote unquote, easier to be done from Australia. So all these show that we're, increasingly recognized here in Australia as a more serious player in the global space scene, if I may say so. But yeah, it's not just about aiming for market share anymore. It's really about offering a reliable, cost-effective option that works for a global customer base, and the global aspect is very important. And that's where I think Australia is stepping up. Now, let's not fool ourselves, right? I mean, the driving force, and I think it goes a bit to what Rada said earlier as well, the driving force behind space activities, like it or not, it's still largely government demand, especially when it comes for satellite capabilities. There's a lot of concentration in the market. It's a market that's largely dominated by the US and a handful of others, of course, with, I'm sorry to say, but a lot of short-term thinking, but which makes sense. And we can touch on that again. But I think we need to start looking further ahead if we're serious about building the infrastructure. And I'm a bit like, philosophically optimistic here. I'm a bit of a dreamer, but if you want to build that infrastructure where humanity operates as a spacefaring civilization, we need to start planning for that now, even if it's a 200-year journey. The question really isn't whether we will get there, but when we start. And we can be the generation that picks up on the generation before us, and we put our one more, a foot forward. So yeah, right now there's a bit of a buzz, of course, around small launchers. And let's be honest, we've seen this before. That's what I was mentioning earlier. Back in the mid-90s, there were all these promises for large constellations like Iridium and Teledesic and others, and suddenly new launchers projects starting popping around. If I'm not wrong, as many as 30 at the time. They pretty much all failed, as there were basically no demand for this constellation project at the time, and most of this launch project died. I mean, Iridium is still around in some as a constellation in some or different form, but who remembers launchers like the Conestoga rocket or the Pegasus? And you can go on Wikipedia to check them out, but you will probably remember that. But anyway, I think the real potential, from my perspective, lies elsewhere, and it's about using a bit of our imagination mixed with some common sense, right? I mean, and again, this relates also to a bit to what Rada said earlier about access to space and bottlenecks. Imagine a redundant network of always-on launch pads capable of sending payloads 24/7 from all across the globe to any orbits. Who do you think would be interested with such an infrastructure? And here in Australia, we're already punching well above our weight, I think. And outside the 6 big space powers, we managed to do a lot despite our size. And we might be small in terms of industry size and population, but we're proving that we've got what it takes to be a serious contender in this game, I guess.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've been long.
No, that was really helpful. I love your looking forward 200 years. You might know that my one word for space in our very first program was intergenerational, and that's how I see it. But of course, that long forward thinking is great, but it means that along the way, a lot of companies rise and fall until we get there. So it still is a very competitive market. So Rada, both you and Francois, and it's not a surprise, seem to be very positive about the future for launch. But my job here, and Torsten won't let me come back if I don't do this, is to play a bit of devil's advocate. Is there, do you really envisage that the demand, let's say for Europe, given that's where you're operating, do you really think that demand will never be met, or is there a finite demand? And can this demand keep on growing? And then also, as more and more of the smaller launch service providers, which are nimble and all that, but their infrastructure is relatively minor compared to the big ones, how will the bigger companies react to the increasing involvement of the smaller companies like yourselves in this mix? So is demand infinite? And how will the industry, and really in Europe, how will it rationalize with more and more of these companies seeking to try to satisfy that demand?
Is the demand infinite for launch services? I would say what is definitely sure is that the demand for space services and space data is basically infinite. And from that, you can deduct an almost indefinite demand in the midterm for launch missions. And with that, going back to the very basic condition of actually carrying out a launch mission, the demand to be able to put it up into space. Now, of course, we know that there is an offer of launch services, but again, it's geographically not well distributed right now. And we also know that there's a monopoly over launch services created by an extremely successful example, which is SpaceX in the world. But at the same time, this is not well balanced anywhere else in the world. Just to illustrate with some numbers from last year, alone from the US, there were 100 launches taking place. And this number will probably increase by 50% by the end of 2024. As a comparison, launches from China were only half of this number, let's say about 50 in 2023. There was maybe a dozen orbital launches from Russian soil. And last year, there were only 3 launches from Europe. And the portion of the Europeans' contribution to the global space industry is much more than, let's say, 3% out of what comes from the USA. So I would say the demand is there and is definitely not yet met. And now coming to the other question, which is, when will the demand for launch services be met? How many launch services providers do we need globally? Difficult to say, because also, as François said, sometimes there are short-term plans, sometimes there are very promising projections of space projects that in the end do not happen. Just on an example that I also can think of, I think in 2004, it sounded much more promising that we will have space tourism on a regular basis by 2015, which we know did not happen with that pace. But nevertheless, the demand to use space, to gather data from space and use it on Earth, and also for our further development and progress as humankind, will inevitably require that we do have transportation options. So I think it is not just a hopeful industry to be in, but it's a highly competitive to be in, because obviously the let's say global space industry will not need an indefinite amount of launchers, but it will need a handful that can cover the satellite demand and can provide a reliable service. And I think this is where Australian companies, European companies, Asian companies, all that are now working to provide a solution to the demand for space transportation will be in an extremely competitive environment. And by the way, we know also from satellite companies that at the moment it is absolutely difficult to find a launch slot on any of the bigger rockets of SpaceX, let's say. So up to 25, end of 2025, 2026, you cannot just book a space transportation mission. So you maybe need to shift your mission over to 2027. So the demand is there. I think the shift that we are now observing coming to more commercial companies right now developing rather smaller launch vehicles, but maybe in the future developing bigger vehicles, will continue in the next decade for sure. And through competition, that will be actually the best way, it will be decided who will stay on the market.
Yeah, I take that, Francois, just extending that to the Australian situation. Do you subscribe to the same view as Rada there? I mean, in Australia, as I said, with all these ambitions, we essentially have no commercial space launches yet. Obviously, things will change, and yet there are just across the water there, we've got this wonderful example of a success story from a launch perspective in Rocket Lab, which has had more than now 50 successful launches. In Australia, there are, as far as I'm aware, at least 3, including your company, 3 companies seeking to develop and operate spaceports, facilitate launch and all of that. But as you said, a country like Australia is outside of the main, if you like, the primary space launch providing countries. So does it make sense from an objective viewpoint? I know you're not here to give specifics, and you certainly, I'm sure, would never criticize anyone else. But does it really make sense in a country like Australia to have this diverse number of companies trying to do the same thing? Or is the market better served and the demand better served by a rationalization, at least in a, if I may put it, a secondary launch region? I don't mean that disparagingly, but a secondary launch region like Australia and New Zealand. Where do you say it? If Rada was answering this question about Europe, I know what she would say. Would you say the same thing, or do you see it as a bit differently?
Yeah. Oh, wow. So that's a loaded question, Steven. There's a lot to unpack there. So okay, let's tackle it step by step, I guess. And first off, to immediately rebound on what you just said, who says we're destined to be a secondary launch region here in Australia and New Zealand? If we take each other together, why not aim to be a primary one? At Equatorial launch, our goal is clear. We want to be the #1 global private spaceport. And why not? I think the issue really with the current approach in the industry is that there's often, and I will come back to that again and again, it's the short-term vision, honestly.
Hmm.
I'm not talking about space Artemis type program, all these kind of things, which are a transition from an older framework. I'm thinking about, and we hear that a lot. I know it's a bit cliche, but it's similar to how the internet, the automotive, and even the airline industry is developed. The real game changer came from building the infrastructure to actually support those industries. And Rada mentioned SpaceX, and SpaceX always come back in the discussion, of course, but SpaceX did not just decide to go to Mars one day out of the blue. They're building what they believe is a sustainable, bold program that evolves over time, of course, and that integrates many seemingly unconnected pieces together. And allow me to do a bit of a segue digression into the original question, but all these pieces that the SpaceX is building, satellite broadband with Starlink, optical intersatellite connectivity, robotics with Optimus, battery farms, the Boring Company, the tunnels, and of course Starship. All this is part of a big vision, but everybody's so focused on Starlink, for instance. And make no mistakes, by the way, others like Amazon, of course, I have to speak about Amazon, but they're doing the same. It's a different bold vision. Amazon is more focused on Earth. Jeff Bezos wants to build the infrastructure in space that will serve basically as the foundation for the next generations of entrepreneurs to innovate and create. And it's smart, I think. It's just like the internet. Nobody knew in the early 90s what we would be doing with it, right? Besides reading books or checking online encyclopedias. Now the whole world economy runs on it, and today's biggest companies have emerged from it. Nobody would have ever thought about that at the time. So I think we need to stop seeing space as a domain, as an environment, which it is, but it's in fact, from this perspective, it's the next platform, I think, for a new kind of economy, a new ecosystem to emerge. But now coming back to a bit closer to your question, I guess, yes, the truth remains, you need sustainable economics to push forward. Like SpaceX learned, I guess, with the Falcon 1 all the way to the Falcon 9, it's not enough just to have the technology. You need a sustainable business model that can grow and address a larger market. And right now we may have many launcher coming out onto the market, but without places to launch, they simply won't survive. And there's a bottleneck there. So does it make sense to have diverse operations in Australia and New Zealand? Absolutely. I mean, it's all about giving these launchers the opportunities they need to prove their worth and build this sustainable future for themselves. And then we will grow with them as spaceports, every spaceport. So yeah, in the end, the market will decide who can grow and adapt, but it's crucial, I think, to have multiple options and launch site to help these companies find their footing right now. And to conclude on this, sorry, I'm always long, don't hesitate to tell me, but I don't think it's about rationalizing the market. I'd say it's more about, yeah, again, building the infrastructure that will enable the industry to thrive in the long run.
Yeah, Torsten, you're hearing all of these really positive things. You have a reaction?
Oh, yes, I do have definitely two questions or 2 points to make before we are moving on the legal side. Two observations. You mentioned Rocket Labs, and we had the pleasure 2 weeks back to have a chat with Peter Beck, the CEO of Rocket Labs, and he had, when he started, very ambitious plan to go to the entire world. And now he has two spaceports where he's launching from, as we know. And I asked him, hey, what are your plans for that? And he said, Torsten, we are ready. We go to any other continent tomorrow if there is a demand, if there is this market that you said, and both of you, François and Rada, talk very positive about. So that is something I would like to see where your feedback comes from. The second one is, last week there was the 4th German-French Space Summit. So because we and our beloved neighbors in France, we try to come back to to find back our eternal love. So we are on our way. So not there yet. However, we had High Impulse, we had Rocket Factory Augsburg, and we had Maya Space on stage, and they talked and made their pitch, and that's all great and shiny and wonderful and la la la. So nice. And then the CEO of Space said about the market size, and he said he sees their analysis says 1 billion euro per year in launch capacities for Europe. Where I say, wait a minute, if you sell your kilogram for 10,000 euro, what I know is cheap, then it's 100 ton to space just out of Europe. Honestly, I don't see it. I don't see the capacity to launch it in any way. B, I don't see the market demand. So I wouldn't see that fantastic. I mean, not to talk about the whatever 20 companies here in Europe that are aiming for the same market. These are just my 2 cents. I know I didn't end it with a question, but let's phrase it that way. I would like to see your perspective on that.
Yeah, and could I add to that? Because I think, Torsten, you made some great points. But SpaceX aside, and clearly SpaceX is, at least in the current market, an exception. We all understand that. Is there a launch company that is actually making money purely out of launches and surviving? Or do they have to diversify the types of activities they're doing to, in a sense, support the launch in expectation of this insatiable demand that will grow and grow? François, Rada, we're both pushing back on you, not because we don't believe you, but it's interesting that many companies have come and gone. So why is it different now? Why will launch companies make money?
I would like to add just one more sentence to give more time to both of you to think about it. There's another, the tiger that we are not taking into the entire equation, the global equation right now, which is on our doorsteps, and that's China. And Rada mentions the numbers of launches that we have seen last year and this year. And there's one country that is rising exponential, including now with reusable rockets and so on and so forth, and sea launch and so on and so on. So they're preparing also for this market. And I think we see, especially from the global south, countries that will go to China to fly from there rather than to the US. I think it's now time to hand back to our guests and not have it a dialogue between us.
I agree, but it's good. Okay, so we've pushed back on you so Rada, Francois, perhaps Rada, your reaction.
Jump in first, François, if that's okay for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I agree with all the remarks that Torsten and Steven made, and probably it will take us more than an hour to go into the depth of all these aspects. But now trying to minimize it only to the most important points of that. So we come back to the question, is there a demand? Then is there a demand in Europe, or is the demand already being supplied from the global space, from China, from the US? I think no one at the moment really can give you fixed numbers of how many launch services providers will stay on the market in the end, because we also see constantly there are new ones evolving. Even if you only focus on Europe, you see a number of launchers being developed in France, and then you have 3 alone in Germany, and then you have other European countries such as the United Kingdom and Spain contributing with more and more launcher projects. I think what we can say for sure is that not all of these companies will be able to be sustainable on the market or to take a market share. The nominal calculation of how much a kilogram to orbit costs, and then whether you can make profit out of it, is of course extremely relevant, and it is one of the biggest challenges for every single launch company, I guess, including Rocket Lab, I guess, including big players such as SpaceX, even though we know that such companies normally do not purely make their profit from commercial launches. Governmental missions are increasingly interesting and incredibly important also to make, let's say, the balance sheets look positive. But I think we need to see this whole demand problematics and survival of launch companies problematics also in a very political context, because it is not just enough to have a handful of reliable launchers anywhere in the world. Sometimes there are considerations who basically imperatively request you to launch as a European company from Europe, especially if you're launching, let's say, governmental missions or intelligence satellites. You would not go to a Chinese provider, and you would also prefer not to go to a US provider for that. And at the moment, Europe, because it does not have its own orbital launch capabilities, or definitely not sufficient ones, we have just seen this July the long awaited inaugural flight of Ariane 6, but we don't really have a space launch market. This means that countries such as Germany or Italy or Spain may have to actually launch their governmental satellite missions on board a US rocket. And probably we all know that launching them on a Chinese rocket is rather not a solution. So the demand is also being created by local, political, strategic considerations. And it's increasingly important that regions such as Europe have their own autonomy of access to space. And this is what will create part of the demand, not purely by economics, but also by geopolitics. And with all the military conflicts that we see rising and basically at our doorstep, rapid response missions are getting more and more important. Europe does not have that capability yet. So obviously there is a long way to go. There is a screaming demand to be able to guarantee access to space, not only for commercial missions and CubeSats and large constellations, but for larger missions such as for disaster management or even military conflict prevention.
Yeah, those geopolitical, thank you, Rada, those geopolitical considerations, of course, we all understand that, and it makes perfect sense. But that also is based on an assumption that governments will support the operation of launch service providers, with tangible support, so that they can have this sovereign capability or this regional capability. In Australia, Francois, for a whole bunch of reasons, that level of very significant government support for launch operations, perhaps it's not prevalent. So how do you respond? You've heard us all, perhaps trying to be a bit negative. How do you respond to this?
Well, first of all, see, I don't think it's being negative at all. I think, I agree mostly with, and I would even say entirely with what you and Torsten said. And sorry if I'm not as conflicting as you would want me to be, but no, there's truth there. Listen, I don't want to be cynical and say that, hey, listen, we're a spaceport and the demand for us is as many launchers as possible, please come in. It's not what I'm trying to say here. In a sense, I agree with everything that Rada said, and she laid that out perfectly well. Listen, it's really about first of all, I think the definition of demand. It's like, where are the satellite? Where is the mass to put in orbit? Again, short-term thinking. If you want to think about a space infrastructure that is going to be the basis for a new type of economy, like I mentioned Jeff Bezos' vision, you will need to factor that in some way, somehow, and someone is going to capture it. And if I'm a rocket lab, again, sorry, I have to maybe a bit cynical. Of course, you don't want to see other coming into your playfield and eat into your market share. So where is the demand? I will go, if it was there, I would go there, of course. Of course, you're a company, maybe you're not making even money on some of your launches. This is the kind of argument you will say. And listen, I'm not a business person, so I probably should stay a bit in my line. That's for sure. But I think, again, we need to take this step by step. We are in a pre-consolidation market, both on the satellite manufacturing side, mission side, and launcher side of things. There will be a consolidation at some point, and there will be not as many actors as there is. But something that will happen, I think, is, as Rada and yourself and Torsten just hinted at, is this geopolitical environment that all of a sudden a country needs to have that access to space. And they're on the sidelines right now looking what's happening. Where can they launch? Can they launch from their country? No, they can't. So where else can they launch? What's a friendly country? All these things are going to create a kind of a critical mass that's happening in the background. and maybe international organizations will need to actually absorb that kind of international logic that is coming. But I think that's where the critical mass will happen. And it's your question, it's a bit like asking how many internet companies from the 2000 bubble are still around today. Or there's still a demand for connectivity today, and which there's an unknown factor. I think that it's really hard to predict. But if we don't put the 1 feet forward to try it, we will never know. Of course, nobody wants to waste money. It needs to be, we need to think about the economics of all that. But yeah, that's for another discussion, I guess.
Well, look, for two lawyers, you both, I think, you've done brilliantly in answering essentially market and industry and economic questions. So thank you for that. And I think we all agree that this is a complex area. Launch will evolve, the industry will evolve, the players will evolve, but how else are we going to get to space, right? I mean, it's an essential service, and space is crucial for all of us. So, look, let me turn a bit to your life as lawyers, because you are, as I said, two of the world's leading commercial space lawyers. Rada, you're dealing. You talked about bottlenecks before, and I imagine part of that bottlenecks, given that you're dealing in multiple jurisdictions across Europe in particular, part of those bottlenecks revolve around educating regulators, listening to regulators, but also dealing in so many different jurisdictions which, let's face it, have perhaps different rules. And of course, overarching that, at some point there might be a unified space law in Europe that will add additional or different rules. How do you as a lawyer, as someone trying to promote the business, but also obviously be a good citizen in terms of complying with all of the regulatory demands and more, how do you deal with the different jurisdictions in your daily lives? How does that work?
Thank you, Steven. Well, it's a very, very colorful life of a commercial lawyer at a space business, I think, nowadays, considering that, as also François mentioned before, it's a pre-consolidation area where many of the necessary frameworks and many necessary aspects of the business, also from a regulatory perspective, are not yet there or are only pre-developed. Taking our example as a company, in this case, I think I can freely speak about Isar Aerospace and its experience. So it's a fully privately funded company, so it does not have the backing of the government or necessarily the governmental support to promote its business or to develop its infrastructure. What we do is, what the company does is, it designs the rocket, it builds the rocket, but then lacking a suitable launch infrastructure, and here we go back to what Australia, for example, is providing, lacking a orbital launch infrastructure from continental Europe, companies such as ours even go so far as to invest themselves and develop themselves their own launch pads and their own spaceports. So this is what, for example, we do right now in Norway. And the legal challenges and the regulatory challenges that a company faces, of course, evolve around the standard commercial processes, setting up a company, operating a company in multiple jurisdictions, having agreements under different jurisdictions, and so on and so forth. But then some of the biggest challenges come exactly with creating, investing hardware, investing infrastructure, and then finding a way to do that where no laws and no regulations yet exist for this specific type of activity. Launches in themselves are not entirely regulated in Europe and in Germany. I think France sets a great example with its national space law, to which many of the other governmental regulators are looking at into Europe. But if you look at how we do it, for example, in Norway, we are basically really not just, as I said, managing and carrying out the launches from Norwegian soil, but we need also to build and start operating a launch pad on Norwegian territory where there is no space law, or there is one that exists since 1969. But the ones of you who have seen it know that it contains 4 or 5 paragraphs, and it does not describe in details the procedures on how things are to be done. The procedures need to be provided by the respective ministry. And this brings me to the challenge that I think is shared between multiple new space companies. You would love to have a certain legal certainty, but you don't have it. There are certain rules here and there, but it's very often quite fragmented or not yet existing. And what helps to overcome the hurdles, or what helps to move forward in this not very well regulated or not widely regulated environment, is to engage as much as you can with regulators, with partners, even there to suggest solutions. I know that companies would normally love, of course, to have a list of requirements that they have to meet, but when there is no such list, you start somehow helping or making suggestions on how this list of legal requirements should look like. And this is how I think it works. It's really interesting to see this new industry going very often hand in hand with the governmental authorities, which also need to yet build up their own expertise sometimes. So
I love it that you've mentioned Norway. You may or may not know that I was engaged, in fact, by the Norwegian government to help them write their new space law.
The original one.
No, not the original one. There's a new one. Not the fourth paragraph. And so I've been working with the ministry, which interestingly enough is the Ministry of Fisheries in Norway. And I was actually speaking to them quite recently. The bill is going to be before Parliament this year. There's a draft that was submitted to Parliament, I think, almost 18 months ago. The bill hopefully will get through this year, as I'm told. I'm no longer involved in that parliamentary process, but it's interesting.
You think they're faster than Germany?
they might be faster
than Germany,
but governments take their time. But hopefully you'll get something more that might be a bit more helpful. So, François, getting back to your life, you and I are good friends. We've had many beers together. I know that your day is not just about regulation under the Space Launches and Returns Act and dealing with space law. I know that that's just one small part of a much broader picture of discussions and negotiations that you have to engage in so that the operation of a spaceport in Northern Australia is viable and acceptable to a whole range of stakeholders. So tell me about that, because I think the people watching would be very interested to know that nobody is a pure space lawyer. There's so many other things involved. Tell me about your range of discussions as you keep that spaceport operating.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a complex topic, of course, and I'm sure Rada will find a lot of familiarity with that as well. But honestly, we could probably spend an entire episode just on this alone. So, yeah, when it comes to operating a spaceport or launching a spacecraft, there's a mountain of permits, approvals, licenses you need to secure. It's not just about space law, as you can imagine, and you're hinting. You've got to deal with everything from environmental approvals, land clearing permit, sacred site considerations, all the way to cultural heritage permissions, airspace, maritime clearances, landowner agreements for the recovery of a first stage, for example, hazardous materials handling, export controls, import licenses, and even radiation regulations if you are in a country where you would handle nuclear, which I guess falls into hazardous materials. But fortunately, I'd say for the spaceport part, the ground segment, it's usually more straightforward. It's not an atypical infrastructure project, I'd say, like compared to an airport, for instance. It's similar in scope, and regulations around it are more well known. The real challenge lies with the launcher itself. And, as each launch trajectory comes with its own set of regulatory hurdles. You can't launch in any direction you want. This is where things get tricky, and this also this is, I think, also where spaceport can add value to a launch vehicle company like Isar or others. At ELA, for instance, at Equatorial Launch, we try to make it as easy as possible for our customers by offering regulatory support as part of our services. So literally, they just need to bring their rockets, and we'll take care of the rest. It's a little bit like our tagline. And sorry for putting a little bit of a ELA spin here, but it's the same for every spaceport anyway. So literally, the launch pad infrastructure, the paperwork, the permit, everything is something that the spaceport is adding value to, to remove all that stress, and that it's quite a heavy work from a small launcher company. But what's great though, I found in that work, is that local authorities and communities and various stakeholders, including space and environmental regulators, they are generally very supportive of what we're trying to achieve. They're smart, and they understand the balance between safeguarding the public interest, like safety and ecology, while recognizing at the same time the benefits that the spaceport brings to the country. But as Rada said, I mean, these regulators and stakeholders are also learning, and they need to ramp up their skills and expertise and their resources, basically, to properly regulate our industry. So it's kind of a learning curve we're all together in. And our role, I think, as a spaceport and as a launch company as well, is to present the narrative clearly and address the misconceptions people often have about the environmental and safety impact of space launches. And in reality, as you said, our work extends far beyond space law because of that. And on any given day, we're acting, I'm acting as an environmental lawyer, an export control expert, a construction lawyer, a public policy lobbyist, a security specialist, you name it. I mean, it's all about understanding the broader picture and ensuring that we reach agreements that respect the needs and concern of everyone involved.
Right, sounds like obviously your days are just so fascinating. Can I, both Rada and Francois, talk to you about the environmental aspects? Because Francois mentioned it a couple of times there. He was talking essentially about the environment on Earth, around the spaceport and all of that. But can I just, should we have concerns, given what you're both saying, that there's going to be more launches, therefore more satellites, more clearly, should we be concerned about the possible environmental and other consequences of a rapid growth in the number of orbits, of launches, therefore an exponential growth in the number of space objects? Should we be worried about environmental aspects in the atmosphere of Earth, in space, and is that something where we need to find a balance? And I know both of you are very, very concerned to ensure that whatever is done in the best possible way. So how do we deal with the environmental consequences, not just on Earth, but clearly on Earth, but in the atmosphere and in orbits, if we're just going to continue to have this rapid growth of launches? Perhaps Rada.
Happy to jump in first here. The answer to the question, do we need to be concerned? Do we need to be worried? I think whenever we speak about environmental effects, we have to be clear. Yes, we have to be worried, of course, because only when we are worried about the negative impact that we create, we are trying to make, for example, missions or operations more environmentally friendly and sustainable. So sustainability and environmental protection definitely must be a high priority for every single space actor, be it a launch operator, be it a satellite operator. At the same time, however, I think there is a need, and I'm pretty sure that François will also support me on that here, because I know that he has some very good data on that. We need to demystify the thinking that you see, with orbital launches, we would be ruining in an irreversible way the atmosphere. If you look into the actual outcome of launches, Of course, there is some impact, but then you have to look closer and see that when, for example, clean propellants are used, and I'm not meaning just biopropellants, but clean propellants such as liquid oxygen, for example, or liquid propane. There are a few. The only impact that they have on the atmosphere is really minimal. It basically amounts to water vapor, and there are no lasting effects on the layers of the atmosphere or in the environment in total. And then at the same time, what is also clear is if we want to have zero impact, we would need to have zero space activities, because as we said, there can be no space activity without a launch. So here, I think the important thing is we need to be worried, we need to be concerned, but only in order to try to make the best use of existing materials, of existing propellants, of cleverly, let's say, using the technology. And instead of having, let's say, one launch per satellite, of course, try to consolidate. And by the way, we see this trend now. We're moving again back from very small satellites to larger satellites, which, however, carry numerous missions. So I think the work to be done is to try to really use the best materials possible, try to diminish the negative effect not only of the launch itself as a launch operation, but also, for example, of supply chains, which, by the way, is a much, much bigger negative factor for the environment than the launch in itself. And then always try to think how to put less space objects for a certain amount of necessary space operations. But, giving up the activity is not an option.
Yeah.
And with that, I hand it over to François, because I think he does have also very good observations on the topic.
Yeah, François, I mean, it's just great to hear the thoughtful and sophisticated way that companies like Isar Space are looking at those environmental consequences, yet they want to continue their business. How do you see it from an environmental perspective? And I don't just mean the environmental protection stuff that you do on Earth, as important as that is, but further beyond that.
Well, first of all, I meant to what Rada just said. I cannot disagree with that. But Steven, I'll still mention a bit the Earth as well, because it's a fair question, and I think we should also reframe what we mean by uncapped growth of launches. First, you seem to say there was no demand, and now all of a sudden we are talking about infinite launches and the impact on everything. And when we talk about a few hundred launches per year, it's a drop in the ocean compared to the impact of the global airline, maritime, and automotive industries all combined. So, or even if you take them separately. So, for instance, the aviation industry alone accounts for millions of flights annually, and their environmental impact far, far outweighs anything that we are doing in the space sector. And if we have to stop, it's the only way to stop any impact we might have. So, in our regulatory compliance work, something interesting is that we've conducted some research, extensive environmental research, notably simulating a scenario where a typical small solid fuel rocket is launched every hour of every day for an entire year. And that's more than 8,000 launches on a single year. And even under such extreme condition, which, let's be honest, is way beyond anything that could realistically happen ever, but never say never, the impact on air quality did not even reach the threshold for non-compliance with air quality standards on the ground and higher in the air. So I think it's crucial to understand that space launches, when all safeguards are in place, are remarkably green compared to many other industries. And feel free to tell me that I've drunk the Kool-Aid. That's fine. I'm used to that. But let's talk about space debris then. And yes, it's a concern, and it's something I'm very keen to approach correctly, because I don't want this to be taken the wrong way. But let's put that into perspective as well. And I know some in our little niche industry will cringe at what I'm going to say, including you, Steven, but that's all right. We tend to hear, I think, a lot of fear mongering about collisions and the Kessler effect. And I'm sorry, these issues are often exaggerated. And for a specific reason, it's industry driven too. And it's an old story that we've inherited from the military industrial complex of all, and we can come back to this in the question, but I will stop right there. But to stay on point, I believe the real question that we're avoiding with all this fear mongering is, can we be responsible custodians of their space environment? And how do we do that? There's plenty of room for everyone, and we need clear, I think, clear, practical rules that enable peaceful access and use of these space resources, rather than unnecessary and unrealistic restrictions that benefit only a few. And I mean, people hate that analogy, but I will still put it out there because I like it. It's it's with cars. Imagine there are 1.5 billion cars on Earth, and I mean car, trucks, SUVs, whatever. I mean, you can't see them from space. If you're on the ISS, you can't see a truck from the ISS at 400 kilometers or 600 kilometers above the Earth. Yet, if you consider that the Earth's circumference is in orbit, imagine the circumference of an orbit 2,000 kilometers above the Earth. That's larger than the Earth, right? So now picture each one of those cars floating in space, all 1.5 billion of them, separated from each other by several kilometers. That's the reality of space. That's how big it is. Yes, there will be conjunction events. Some companies are providing software service to analyze those conjunctions, make alerts. But the concept of cleaning space often comes from our lack of imagination, I think, and our lack of understanding about what space truly represents and how big it is. Now, that don't make me say what I don't want to say, that we should not take care of that. But I truly believe that instead of limiting launches, we should, I think, focus on establishing proper guidelines like debris avoidance and deorbiting procedure. Obviously, let's also implement and work with sustainability ratings. And I think it's either Rada, who mentioned that in the previous conversation we had or not, but we need rules of the road to accommodate growing space activities, not restrict them. I think it's really about using our imagination and intelligence to project ourselves into a future, into that future, and manage it wisely. So with thoughtful regulation, I guess, and I'll stop on that, but thoughtful regulation, collaboration, and the technological innovation that should come with it, I think we can achieve a sustainable and thriving space environment for generations to come. But it starts with us and our behavior, not by scaring everybody in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I don't agree with everything you said, but I certainly agree we need to rethink the way we think about space for a whole range of reasons. So, Torsten, you're the technical expert amongst us, right? Will technology, is technology the savior here? If there is a problem, and François says that perhaps the discussion about the problem is overblown, but where do you see this, and do you have any feedback or questions of our panelists? We've kept them for so long, but perhaps you might have something to add to them.
Sure. First of all, let me put us on one table here now, as we're going to the more interactive session. So it's interesting to see that out of our over 80 audience or people in the audience combined, there are no questions. But however, I'm prepared. I do have a ton of questions, and there's so much to disagree what François just said. And from my point of view, we are in a very human behavior if we say, hey, we can all manage that. Clear answer to your question, Steven, I don't think that technology can solve any of our problems as in humanity. It can help us, but it cannot solve it. I mean, technically, yes, but not from our behavior, because when we talked about the infinite launch demand, when we talked earlier, and I found it fascinating what François said, the 200-year thinking, the long forward thinking, that is wonderful. But in my opinion, it does not work with our profit-driven economy at the moment. No one has the breath to do a 200-year project. That changed, that happened in the past without any doubt. So Eiffel Tower and whatever, there are a number of examples as humanity. But I don't think that we can solve space. That I totally agree that we need a kind of regulatory sooner than later. STM, call it as you want it, but we need it. Discussions are on the go, but they're all very slow. I mean, we have the FCC that put a number of regulatories in place, but how to execute and so on and so forth. I mean, I would say my concerns go further than what just was discussed. I also see not just the environmental impact, and even François, when you say we can launch 8,750 launches or a year, and we don't have an impact on the atmosphere, I would question these kind of studies, because in the 60s and the 70s, when the space shuttle flew, NASA made this study and said, okay, yes, we see holes in the upper atmosphere, and just it was mitigated by the dynamics of the atmosphere. But now, having this higher cadence, these holes will grow. And so the other thing which wasn't discussed here was the spectrum issue. I mean, it's nothing to do with the launchers, but the launcher as a carrier for the demand. And if we are not able to solve at the moment the spectrum issue for the growing demand and space data, and you mentioned all these nice buzzwords, it will affect the launch industry as well. And I know I fired out a number of points here, but what I would like to hear on a positive note from François is, how did you manage the cooperation with the indigenous community in Australia, that you all go in one direction? Because that is something, when you want to set up a spaceport, wherever you are on the world, there you have these fights against that. I mean, everyone wants to fly, but no one wants to have an airport in his garden.
So thanks. There's so much to unpack. Francois,
which one do you want to answer?
It's your call, your last reflections, and then we'll go to Rada, because I think there's so much that's come out of today's discussion.
I love this question.
I'll for another session, obviously.
Yeah.
I will try to be very short then, so that both Rada and I can answer. But a lot of unpack. But listen, well, Torsten, we can agree to disagree. That's fine. We'll have another breakfast to do that. You're mentioning, I'm not going to go into the paper discussion. I've just read another study the other day, desktop research about aluminum oxide from burning, from re-entry, from starting satellites, depleting the ozone layer. We can use that one to have a discussion, because we're going to see a lot of this desktop research, which is not based on empirical validation and all that. Right. I have some theories about this we can discuss. Yes, let's not. I don't want to say something that. Don't make me say something I don't want to say, which is that there is no impact and we should not be careful about it. Yes, we should, but it's all about what I said earlier about having that long-term vision and being intelligent about it. If something creates toxicity in the atmosphere, let's then have the sustainable approach right from the ground and have rules that says no aluminum for a satellite. Is going to be wood. I don't know. It could be anything, but something that doesn't create that toxicity. It starts in the whole supply chain. And the narrative right now is using what's already in space, killing us now, instead of trying to prepare for the next generation. Yes, satellites are going to, in low Earth orbit, are going to burn into the atmosphere. That's the nature of low Earth orbit. So at some point, it will do some mess. But how do we do this better for each next iteration? That's where the regulator, that's where the policies, that's where all this environment of people getting together, it's naive to say that, but can help make that happen and keep commercial operator accountable to that. Now and I will stop just saying a quick word on the native First Nation collaboration, because I think this is absolutely a fantastic one. In Australia, we've had a lot of fires here, and we never really listened to the First Nation people and their tradition on how to handle fire cleaning, to handle the forest so that we don't have fires. And actually, at least in the case of our spaceport, and I know other Australian spaceports are doing exactly the same. we are really working very closely with them, and we intend to continue in doing that a lot. They come with us on site to recover, and we did that for the NASA launch 2 or 3 years ago. First Nation communities came with us, recover the whatever debris or first stage. It was not debris, was the first stage that you recover from a sounding rocket. Use their traditional way of reshaping the environment. They are really part of that pipeline, and that's why they're excited to work with us, because their whole cosmology is with the stars. They come literally. Humanity comes from the stars, from their beliefs, and it's they're basically reconnecting with that, and they are teaching us so much about it. This is fantastic. So yeah, that deserves another episode, because I'm really not the right person to talk more about it. But I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, and I've always said, and it's such an important message. Thank you for sharing that we have so much to learn from in the work that I do at the UN. We have so much to work on Indigenous perspectives, and we now are including that in the discussions, which is a great forward step, albeit a baby step, but we're moving. So thank you for that. Rada, final reflections. We've been a bit tough on both of you, but in a good way, because I think penetrating questions mean that you come up with, as you say, the right solutions. You understand the problems, you understand the concerns, you come up with solutions. So some final reflections from you based on everything we've talked about today.
Thank you, Steven. I would like to come back to my word for today, which was being conscious and having consciousness over all the complex issues that we are facing. I think in whichever direction you would argue, be it, okay, we can say the indefinite demand for launches and for too many launch missions is not a good thing. We need to restrict that. Has some truth in it. Of course it does. At the same time, as a counter argument, you can say, but how do we want actually to progress also on Earth when we know that we absolutely depend on space, not just to live our modern life with navigation and mobile phones, but we basically gather more than 50% of the data that we need to manage and to combat climate change from space. So obviously, the choice is not between not going to space or not having launch missions, but rather how do we want to do it? And the how, I think, must be characterized, again, by being more conscientious about the value of space for all of us as a platform, but François, as an environment indeed. This here I would counter argue you. And then always look into how to do it in the most, let's say, forward-looking, intelligent way, not just by saying, I don't care what happens to the next generation. I do as I please now, as I see the biggest profit now. No, we need to do that in a very forward-looking mode, and not continuing the current, let's say, trend of laissez-faire. We just produce space debris because we don't have the money to invest into space debris mitigation, and someone else will take care of it. This someone else are going to be our children, our grandchildren, the next generations. So it is all our responsibility to not drastically argue against or for something, but rather argue in a clever way on what is the best way to do it. Because basically we're all in the same boat, right? It's one humanity, one space. So in space, we all know that the boundaries disappear.
What a great way to finish this discussion. And of course, we could all go for much longer, but I agree with you. It's probably the most erudite discussion I've ever heard in an Oktoberfest tent. So maybe we're setting the bar very high for next year's Oktoberfest. I don't know. But hey, Torsten, it's been fantastic to have François and Rada. Both of you, Rada, François, you've just, every day I learn from people like you about how important it is to have a holistic view to everything we do in space. Of course, you work for companies that are there. It's a tough business. They want to make money. They compete. But you, in all of your reflections, show us that, there's much more to it than that. And that you're very, to use the word conscious and to use your word, François, both of you, I think, have transformed the nature of what a lawyer working in this area is. And, I really, really applaud you both. But I also thank you. It's been a lovely discussion. We could go on for another, day on this, but I've got other things to do. You've got other things to do. Torsten's got to go out and celebrate Oktoberfest as well. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. It's been a fantastic discussion. And Torsten, it's on again next year. Again, we'll be back early in the new year, but this has been a fantastic discussion, and I hope you've enjoyed it as well with these great people. So I'll pass the floor to you. Thanks, Torsten.
No, thank you very much, and thank you, Rada and François. It was really fantastic. But Steven, I have to disappoint you. I'm not celebrating Oktoberfest here in Prussia. I know there are beer tents here in Berlin as well, but I just enjoy this very great day here, which is a public holiday, and take it a bit slower before the madness of the next events.
Enjoy it.
And here we are. So we don't have at the moment for you in the audience online events prepared, because there's so much where you can go and meet us and talk to us at the moment as we speak. Emma, our editor-in-chief, is still in Bavaria. I think, again, yesterday it's Oktoberfest at the Aurora Take Wildfire conference. Next week, we have here in Berlin the InnoSpace Masters, another governmental DLR event to foster new ideas on space. Then a few of us will be at the IAC in Milan. We have the great honor to broadcast live from the DLR booth, which is totally cool. So we will have a small studio there and then broadcast live and entertain the world, or at least the people that are not coming and still in our bubble and are interested what we have to say. Then a week later, back in Munich, the Munich New Space Summit that our Dr. Amagati will moderate as Master of Ceremony. Then we're planning to go to Norway, to the Spaceport Norway. Very important, very interesting. And Isar Aerospace is a big sponsor for obvious reason of that event as well. Then we have Converse, another interesting consortium for on-orbit servicing. I think that deserves also some light to shed on Steven in an upcoming session. Space Tech Expo is on the horizon, and drum rolls are IPSec and the what is
APRASAT, Asia Pacific Space Regional Space Agency Forum. Yeah.
I couldn't say it, but better words in person. That might get me to Down Under and in end of November. So we will see. But it's in parallel to Connecting the World from the Skies in Riyadh. So Riyadh, Perth, we will see. Good. I think that's it from our end here. Anything to say here for all of you that no, Steven, what are we planning for our number 19, early next year instead?
I think you and I are going to meet a couple of times at a couple of events, and we will discuss, but I think we'll start with another crackerjack, probably late January or early February. It depends on some travel things. So don't worry, we'll be back for number 19. But it's a tough bar that we've set with wonderful people like Rada and Francois. Yeah. It
always depends on the trouble things, doesn't it?
It does.
Talking with a lawyer. Okay, the audience. We are very excited to have you here today. Thank you all for your interest. And again, thank you, Rada. Thank you, François, for this fantastic conversation here. Rada, thank you especially to you on your public holiday, on your day off. The first mass goes on us. So I think the mass this year is 15 euro or something like that?
Yep, that's the official price, yeah. 15.
Okay.
But it's 1 liter on the other hand. Many people are happy with that.
Yeah. Okay.
But not for breakfast. Not for breakfast.
Well, for Bavarian breakfast.
Weißwurst and Händel and so it goes. I mean, us the locals. For all of you, yeah, please find and subscribe our newsletters on our website. Follow us on social media, on X, on LinkedIn. I don't know how long we will stay on X, because at the moment it's a bit overwhelming what comes from that side. But we are on LinkedIn for the elder generation. We are on Facebook, still on Facebook, and yeah, we would see. So for all of you that have an interest to support us, to keep us working on what we do and provide these kind of services for you, please become a Space Watcher today or help us in our business club. So that would be also something very fantastic. So we also have this cool Maxi, which is not senior. Here we are. So and again, the audience, thanks for joining us, for being here. We hope to see you very soon in one of the upcoming events that I mentioned before. Otherwise, follow us on social media. And don't forget to become a Space Watcher. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.